For today's example, we're going to be going through a Precor C956i. This is one of the most popular and will likely still be one of the most popular machines for a long time, simply because they were just made so well and they are so serviceable. Just so you know, on this particular one, all you need is a 3/16 Allen head. I always like these extended ones, these longer. I think this is a 6-inch, and that's just because they can get into some of these holes a little bit easier. So you need that 3/16, remove 2 bolts down low on these, on both sides. These holes are for your adjustment on the rear roller, so don't put the 3/16 in there. And then there are also 3/16 bolts on both sides here and on the front here on this hood. So once you loosen those up, you can pull this hood up and back, and it comes off easily. As you can see, it is rather accessible already with just removing those 2 plastics. Also going to need these side rails removed to get to the deck mounting hardware. Some things to note. In particular, this little guy clips onto the rear roller. And this is just a shield, but specifically for not letting any foreign objects, especially hopefully fingers. Now, as always, the first step to doing any parts replacement, make sure you're unplugged, no power to the unit. You don't want any surprises. You need a 6mm for here, and a 9/16 socket for here. But we're going to start with your 8mm, removing this rear roller. And that was for 10 half turns. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to relieve the strain. And you can also do 5 full turns if it'll allow, so that'll just barely make it. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do whichever is easier for you. Just make sure that you only go 5 full turns or 10 half turns, and then go back to the other side. We're just going to repeat this process 3, 4, 5 until it's loose. Now this one is a little gummy. I think it's technically loose enough, but I'm still just going to be safe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this one's almost all the way out. So I'm going to go ahead and back it all the way out. And then we'll take a few more turns. There we go. Alrighty. And in removing, once you get past that initial tension to where you're not going to tweak those bolts, you can technically use electric tools to take it out the rest of the way. I always prefer not to, just because I've seen too many guys screw things up that way. So now we've got these belt retainers held on by 1 bolt on the side of the frame here. These ones, there's no special process, just remove. Make sure you don't lose any of this hardware. You've got a split washer and a flat washer on there, and then another finger guard. And other side. And same thing, don't lose your hardware or your fingers. Now, this roller has slots in the frame here. Just lift straight up. And they are heavy. Don't get me wrong about that. Now, one thing you will find on most of these, especially if they're using the original impregnated wax belt system still, or if they're not serviced regularly enough, you'll end up with this nasty caked on here. That's not supposed to be there. What that is a combination of that coating, some dust. So what I like to keep on hand for that, good old used hotel key. All you do to clean this off of there, curve this to the roller, and it'll scrape that gunk right off. Like it's not even there. Make it look beautiful and new again. And you always want to make sure to remove that nasty so that it doesn't go back into the deck system. So we're going to remove the front roller now. We're going to walk this belt off. Simply put some inward pressure and roll it back. So it falls off the ridge there. And then you can pull it right off the motor. And a lot of times I'll actually like to use this as a handle to try and help lift. So again, straight up. And of course when it cooperates, and again, they are heavy. Now one thing you want to avoid, especially if you're reusing a deck, you don't want to drag this across the deck, especially this part that has the ribs where the belt goes. So you just want to lift and make sure that you're clearing the deck so you don't scratch it there. It is critical that you remember which side goes where. So whenever I'm pulling a rear roller, obviously the front roller is going to be pretty specific. The drive belt will only go on one side, so you don't have to mark that one. This one, I've got it mentally marked, but what you should do in the field is make a standard practice of what I would do is mark the right side. Just take a Sharpie and put a line on it or put an R on it or something so that you make sure that that roller goes back into the machine facing the same direction. And the reason you do that is because when these rollers break in on the machine, the bearings break in one direction. That's true for Precor, for Life Fitness, for Matrix, for any commercial grade machine. The roller or the bearings are going to break in one direction. So if you flip those and have them spin the opposite direction, it'll make the bearings fail a lot sooner. So always make sure you put them back in the same direction that you took them out. Unless you're replacing the bearings. If you're replacing the bearings, then you can have them break in new in whichever direction. That's true if you're replacing the whole roller as well. But if you're reusing it, mark it, make sure that you put it in the same direction. We're going to grab our 9/16 or 14 millimeter. Should work fine in pinch. Socket. And again, it is alright to use an impact to remove these ones. I don't recommend using it to put them on. But again, that might just be personal preference for not wanting to break things. So these guys back out. This whole plate simply lifts off. 2 bolts and a retainer plate. Same thing on the other side. And once those 2 are out, this deck is no longer connected to the machine. So from there, what we can do, lift this up to one side, pull that nasty old walking belt off of there. Not a bad idea to have a second set of hands if you got it, but it is entirely possible to do so though. Lay that back down. And this is your best chance to make sure that the internals are clean and you've got the most solid and smooth deck surface up that you possibly can. So this one's not too bad, it's dirty. Obviously, let's check the underside. Both sides have been used and both sides would work. Since both sides of this are okay, I'm just going to take a clean dry rag and clean this off. But what we will want to do ultimately is remove this deck from the machine. Flip it up here and make sure that we vacuum out this bottom side that is gross and vacuum out those frame components and those deck supports to make sure that's clean. This is also a great time to vacuum under the machine itself. If it's sitting in the club, chances are this bit right here hasn't seen a vacuum in a few years. So now's your chance to clean that up and it'll help further prevent dust and lint and things from getting into the system and help it last longer that way. These decks do have inserts that come in one side. So while they are flippable, when you go, this is actually originally the bottom side, so this one's been flipped twice. If you're bolting in from this side that has the flat part of this insert, you don't want to reef down too hard or you'll pull that barrel nut right out of the deck, and then that won't hold the side rails on anymore and you need to get a new deck. But make sure that everything is good and clean. And now we've got it apart, essentially to where we've got the deck separate, the belt's out, rollers out, everything can be cleaned, serviced. Alright, so we've got our rollers polished, we've got everything cleaned up. We are about ready to put this belt on. So always make sure that one of the last things you do before you put a belt on is get this deck nice and polished. Make sure it's smooth, make sure it's shiny, make sure there's no cuts, breaks, cracks, any damage of any kind, especially between where the belt's going to go. So I'm just going to buff this a little bit and we'll be ready to start on this belt and getting this thing back together. I do prefer Ultra belts just because they are a thicker belt, much more true to what you would get from the manufacturer without all the extra markup. You just do have to make sure that you use the lubricant so that it works for a long time, because they don't come impregnated like the original ones. You'll have to add that yourself. It's one extra step that'll save you a few $100, so to me it's worth doing. One other thing about these that I like is that they're non-directional. A lot of manufacturers' belts are directional. First step with these Ultra belts, always take out the Ultra wax, open this guy up, and spray generously to the inside of the belt. We're just going to spray all over for a few seconds here. Really get this guy coated. So we got one side done pretty well. I'm just going to flip this over real quick. Get this other side pretty good. And then this belt is going to be ready to go on. Now to get this on, we're just going to have to lift this deck up and slide the belt on. One of the easier ways to do that, set this down for just a second, is to just hold this deck real quick. Just being thorough. We'll make sure that we're not leaving any scuff or fingerprints on there. So this guy up to one side. You can step inside the treadmill. And this is just all the more reason to keep this as clean as possible. Don't want to get all that nasty on you. And simply pull one side to the other. Slide those down. And that's on well enough that we can step out. And I want to make sure that you're not getting that belt pinched anywhere in the frame with the supports, because obviously it's going to need to be able to move. Then, let's see, we always want to start by replacing the front roller. Pick up, drop that on, and before we drop this in, we put our new drag belt. And I always put that just inside that pulley, just so you've got a good handle. But then also you can walk it on a little bit easier. Pull that up to the front, pull this to the inside, and essentially you're just going to keep this centered and spin that until it pops on here in a second. And we're on. Just make sure that that's nice and centered, and we will be doing some alignment with the bolts later. Now at this step I always like to apply decently more lubricant just to make sure that we're going to keep this thing clean, because again, anti-dust, anti-static. So this is going to repel things and keep this clean. So I always do recommend this for any aftermarket belt. Got it all polished up, and we did mark one side to make sure that this one's going back in the right direction. Now we've got to align the center pin and get these bolts started. Alright, so what I tend to like to do in this situation is get your trusty big flathead screwdriver here. And we're just going to carefully pry this back enough that we can get this bolt to start. And we want to make sure that this is as straight as possible, just so that we don't risk cross-threading these at all. Takes a little bit, but there it goes in nice and easy, and that's what you want. Okay, so then we get this one going. Same way, just make sure that you're centered well. Lined up straight before you really go for it. Should go in without any hesitation. If it hesitates at all, back up and try a different angle. It should be pretty easy to do by hand. Alright, so now we've got it back in place. Before we get everything tensioned, we're going to want to make sure that this is lined up where it needs to be. So when you look down in here, there is some hardware that will receive these bolts. This one's lined up, so I'm just going to go ahead and get these started. You don't want them too tight, because then it'll be hard to manage putting them back on this side. So probably need to lift and do some minor adjustments here. Okay, there we go. It wasn't all heavy. I just didn't think it was. Okay, lined up. Get these ones back on there. Then, always important to get the nasty off of things before we put them back. You want it as clean as possible. So, this guy, after a quick wipe down, just slide it right inside there. Take your bolt, finger tight. We're just going to get everything started for now and circle back to it. Now, one thing I do want to point out, if you have this rear roller too loose and you run it, you'll hear a little bit of metal rub. So if you hear metal rub coming from the back, make sure you've got your rear roller tight enough, because that's most likely it. Same thing. Make sure this is wiped down nice and clean, because this bit especially goes under the belt as a guard. So you want to make sure you're not putting any new dirt or anything in there. Same deal. Just slide over, bolt together. Okay, so we're back with our 3/16, our 6mm, and our 8mm. First thing we want to do is just tighten down these bolts with 6mm. Make sure that those brackets are nice and solid. There we go. We're going to pull this back 5 turns at a time. So 10 half turns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Again, careful to not pull too far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now to draw the balance the other way, we can go 10 more. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This one's going to take a bit. And what we're really looking for is just make sure you've got clearance between these brackets and the roller. So right now they're even. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That one's made clear. So we'll go and match it here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, we've got some clearance and these should spin freely. Yep. Looking good. Then, from here, essentially we just put the plastics back on, set everything aside, and then we come up, just hit start, let the treadmill run, get started before we get up there on it. And, side rail first, go ahead and just slowly walk this lubricant in for just a minute, and get it up to a comfortable walking speed. And when you're fairly comfortable with it, you feel it spread around and it's not drifting to one side or the other too quick, do what's called a stomp test. So keep it between about 1.5 and 2 miles an hour, then get a firm grip on your console and give it a good stomp. And what you're doing is seeing if you can stop that belt. Because if you can stop this belt and you can watch that front roller keep spinning, then you know that this belt needs tightening. If you stop this belt and the front roller stops spinning, then you know that the drive belt needs tightening, and you'll want to take a look at that. As far as alignment, you'll want to make sure that the distance on either side that the belt is from the railing, so the distance between the belt and the rail here, equals the distance between the belt and the rail here. And to get those centered, you just go ahead and do quarter turns tightening. So this one needs a little bit more. And don't go more than 2 full turns. When you get to 2 full turns, go ahead and start loosening. Right? And what you're going to do is just balance that out. So whichever side it's closer to is the side you tighten. Because if you tighten this, it pulls that roller back and changes the angle. And then that angle forces the belt away from it. If you have it too loose, obviously it'll be an inward angle and it'll force the belt to come to it. So use that to find your balance and just make sure that you can do a stomp test and the belts don't slip and that lubricant is nice and distributed under the belt. The belt is centered. And that's basically the gist of how you replace a walking belt.